one of our major initiatives. And currently I work at a venture capital in Silicon Valley. So obviously gender disparity is a major issue. The benefits of evolving in technology every day. So that's why this topic is really close to my heart. And I just wanted to start by doing a quick poll of the audience and seeing why people wanted to be here with us today. The first question is, how many of you here want to pursue entrepreneurship or be an entrepreneur in your future career? Awesome. That's my second question is, how many are you here because you want to find out about specific opportunities to make change for women? That's also fantastic. Great. So that just gives us an idea of how we want to guide the conversation. The second thing I want to bring up is that this topic can be somewhat of a double-edged sword. When you even ask the question or say that you're going to be speaking about gender, that sometimes implies that there are limitations or challenges that women face. And I want to highlight not only the unique experiences that these women have had working in social enterprise, but also the opportunities that are inherent in being a woman working in this sector, and what some of the things that they've been doing to empower other women around the world really entails. So without further ado, I'd love each of the panelists to introduce themselves and then also describe how gender or working in gender has somehow shaped your career trajectory.
Do you need a mic? Okay. I think I'm fine. I'll just speak up a little bit. My name is Sabah Gul. I'm the founder of a company called Pop and Day. We work with female artisans in Pakistan and bring their craft to global markets. So really, connecting their skills to large markets where they get big visibility and the impact and the livelihoods that they get from the products that we sell throughout the world. My work is really all about women. We work with women in the sense that we empower the women to take charge of their lives, to make the choice to create livelihoods for themselves. We sell the products to women. Our team is almost entirely women. So my work is very much about women. I was born and raised in Pakistan, and I felt, I grew up sort of seeing a lot of injustices and a lot of disparity, gender disparity in Pakistan, and so I was always sort of driven to work to change that inequality. Did you want to talk about just introduce and what
Yeah, in general, being a woman you feel has sort of shaped how you did.
Yeah, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with this question because, while I think it is an important topic that is relevant because there are unique challenges to being a woman entrepreneur, and honestly to being a woman in any field of life, it's not just entrepreneur, whether you're a writer or a painter or, whatever you're doing in life. But at the same time, when I get invited to speak on panels, I don't like the feeling of being pigeonholed into being a woman entrepreneur. I like to talk about entrepreneurship in general and what it is that we're doing to change the world, to create impact. And so I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with it, but I will say that there are unique challenges to being a woman entrepreneur, especially in a place like Pakistan, where I have seen and felt that women are at times viewed as less intelligent or less capable or more easily taken advantage of. The industry that I work in manufacturing, so it is very male-dominant, so I feel that. But at the same time, the one thing I'd like to point out in today's panel is that I think that those challenges are unique to women, but I think that as women we sometimes forget that there are challenges that are unique to being men when you're thinking of doing a startup, such as the fact that men are more expected to have a stable income. It's a harder choice for them to give up a stable job and to migrate to a startup because they're expected to, provide for their families, etc., and many more such challenges. So I think it's important to have a balance beyond this, but I do think it is important conversation to have for sure.
I'm Nell Derek Debevoise. I'm the founder and CEO of Inspiring Capital, and we match business talent like MBA students. We recruited here on campus in the fall. Also women returning to the workforce, which is another whole area of interest, with a private sector background, but looking to get into social enterprise, whether nonprofit, for-profit. So I worked 10 years in the nonprofit space, definitely doing some women's empowerment work, both working with women entrepreneurs and moms of young kids. But I would say I am a woman entrepreneur is probably most top of mind on this question. And it's, I think, you made really good points. I think that coming out of the nonprofit space and now being more in the social enterprise impact investing space, it's really interesting to watch the gender balance start to approach 50-50 and the further you go towards impact investing, become more male dominant, right? It's an amazing thing how men follow the money, at least stereotypically, right? It's amazing. Women are much, if you are at any nonprofit conference, it's 80-20 or 75-25 or whatever, and then now that you start talking about impact investing, especially when it's microfinance or some of the real commercially viable things, the room becomes much more male. And gosh, how crazy is that? So there's so much to say here. I have so many opinions. We'll get into a lot more of it. I think what I want to mention here is as a woman entrepreneur, I think that the funding issue is really interesting, right? So there's, taking gender out of it, there is a mixed bag of perspectives on raising investment for your startup or not, right? And some of that is based on what you're doing. If you're trying to build infrastructure projects or some really complicated tech with really high security needs and development, you probably need to raise the money, right? You're not going to be able to just bootstrap that. But taking those extreme examples out, there are mixed crowds of thought, right? I helped one of my B school professors write a book on the customer-funded business, looking at things like Microsoft and Airbnb, which, yes, at some point raised money, but originally were really customer-funded, right? And there's a lot of advantages to that because you retain equity, you retain control, you don't have outside investors to report to, you grow more naturally, you follow customer demand, yeah? And women, we know, raise less investment money, right? So on one hand, that's a disadvantage. I think on the other hand, it's an advantage because we retain equity, we retain control, we retain a sense of what customers are going to pay for, not what some VC is going to get excited about and we pay $1 million for now, and then a year later we realize nobody needs an app to say yo, and it crashes. So was that a really good So I think that I really think a lot and struggle with that. We have grown very organically with customer feedback and customer payment to fund ourselves, which in a lot of ways is great. We've made some really significant pivots and we're really doing things that the market is just demanding, rather than an idea that we started with on day one that we're like, we're going to do this and it's going to be hard because entrepreneurship is always hard, but we're going to persist because we know we're right. And though it's tough, right? Relying on revenue means that you don't just have 6 months of payroll in the bank. And so I think that that's a really interesting thing for women entrepreneurs to think about, watching yourself and being sure that you're not just being that, I'm just going to be a really good student and get an A+ for 3 years and then hopefully maybe somebody will just pick me and give me some money and I'll grow, right? Because that's probably not ideal either. But on the other hand, if you're just being scrappy and smart and frugal, maybe that is a good thing, and we can turn that into a gender trend that can be an opportunity and an advantage rather than a challenge. So obviously lots of thoughts on this, but I'll pause there for now and get into more later.
So first of all, thank you so much for having me. Thank you everyone for coming to today's panel. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I love the first question about how gender has affected my career trajectory. Because, like I imagine some of you in the audience, the whole foray into gender for me has been largely an accident. I started out my career many years ago in management consulting. I went to Penn, and I grew up in a very modest background. My family came here from the Philippines. I was born there, and it was a true quirk of fate. My dad had entered a lottery to win a chance to enlist in the U.S. military during the Vietnam War. And you serve a number of tours, and if you do a number of tours, you're able to apply for citizenship, and that's how we came through. So for us, there was always a sense in our family that our fortune was very much a twist of fate, and we were going to be ready for it, but it was never lost on us that we were handed an amazing opportunity. So fast forward, I was in college, going to school at Penn, and I was thinking about what I wanted to do. And growing up the way that I did with so many other poor families, and thinking about all of our families back in the Philippines who were still, the vast majority of them, still quite poor. My dad had a brother in California who also joined the military, but other than us, everybody else was very poor. And I could not stop thinking about how lucky we were and what a twist of fate it was that we were able to have this opportunity. And I saw so many families that made it and so many families that didn't, and I couldn't let go of that question about why some people were so much luckier, and maybe what did we do? What was our enabling context that allowed us to achieve? So when I went to Penn and I majored in economics, I thought about what I was going to do next. And even though I wanted to go into the social change space, I decided to go into management consulting. Back in the day, everybody did management consulting or investment banking. That's what people did. And as my father liked to put it at the time, fulfillment is for rich people. And I thought to myself, gosh, well, I'm going to pay the bills. And I did that for years, and I worked as a management consultant, leaders, risk advisor. When I had finally gotten to my last corporate job at Ernst & Young, I was head of entrepreneurship for the Americas for Ernst & Young, which is one of the big four professional services firms. We were very much engrossed in the idea of high growth entrepreneurship and very much believers of the idea that high growth entrepreneurship can really spur economic growth. We were with Google when it was 3 people, eBay when it was 4 people. We were with these very, very disruptive firms very early on. But as I went to these events, like the Entrepreneur of the Year, which is probably the biggest entrepreneurship convening in the world right now, it was a sea of men. It was probably, I forget the exact stats, 97, 98% men, the vast majority of them Caucasian. And doing the work that I was doing and thinking about the markets in which we were operating, we were disproportionately working with people of affluence, people of privilege, men, Caucasians, regardless of the market. And I kept thinking back to this question I had been wrestling with for most of my life. Why do some people make it and some people don't? And so when I was asked to lead a set of initiatives that took more of a, we thought it was a broader economic growth strategy. We referred to it internally as a pro-core strategy. We started to realize through the research that if you want to take a pro-core strategy, the most effective way to do it is through women. If you think about how women spend money when they're allowed to control household finances, and this is worldwide, on average worldwide, women invest about 90% of their earnings in their household, things like housing, food, education, and this is no offense to men, it's just the findings. Men spend about 30 to 40% of their earnings in the family. So as you think about what you want to achieve in the world, if you need to invest, if you want to invest in high growth businesses, and you want a certain kind of broad-based economic growth, how do you do it? The research was unequivocally women. And so I switched over, I left the corporate world, which was a huge deal for me at the time, to go work for Hillary Clinton's organization. About 15 years ago, she founded an organization called Vital Voices with Madeleine Albright, whose purpose was to invest in women's empowerment. So they do human rights, mostly around human trafficking, mostly around sex trafficking of women and children, political empowerment, and economic development. So I left Ernst & Young to run economic development globally, and our biggest set of work was around entrepreneurship. And then, of course, the work that we did over my years at Vital Voices really opened my eyes to all of the potential that could be unlocked in so many markets around the world if we were only to invest in women entrepreneurs who account for the vast majority of small businesses, but account for about less than 1% of corporate procurement, which is for so many businesses the real avenue to explosive growth. And so where am I now? I'm at Lyft. It's a small, we're about a $9 million organization here in the US. I left the international development realm, supporting women entrepreneurs around the world because I sort of got the bug that I wanted to do something more direct. And I lit onto this organization called Lyft, which works in 8 high poverty neighborhoods around the country. I had read about them for the first time in the New York Times, profiled by David Bornstein, who's the last keynote, talking about their disruptive approach to thinking about poverty. And their big idea, which isn't totally unique, there are a handful of organizations who feel this way, is that people who are living in poverty are just like everybody else. They just have less cash and fewer connections, and they want the same things out of life as everyone else. And if you can think about people living in poverty as people with strengths and aspirations, as well as needs and challenges, how can that strengths-based orientation unlock different solutions to helping people in poverty? So I came over to Lyft, and I have been working there for the past 1.5 years as their chief program officer. And again, in every market in which we serve, it is disproportionately women. If you look at the stats here in the U.S., the base of the poor is largely the base of women. Women are more likely to be poor than men. Women who are head of single-headed households are far more likely to be poor, about 41%. And children of female-headed households are more likely to be poor. About 56% of them are of children living in poverty or in single-headed households led by a female. And so as I think about sort of where sorry, this is a long-winded answer, how gender has affected trajectory for me, it hasn't been the point. Although I completely believe in investing in women, on principle's sake. For me, it's been more of a practicality sake, where the impact that I have been asked to achieve in my work, going through women, has just been the most fantastic day. So I'm just going to leave it there.
So I'm Jackie Vanderbright with U.S. Trust Bank of America, and at U.S. Trust, which is the private bank of Bank of America, I run the impact investing platform, which for us we define as everything from negative screening all the way up through impact investing in social impact bonds. And so I am probably a little bit different in terms of my role as an entrepreneur now, although over the course of my life I have been an entrepreneur. I have started both a nonprofit and a for-profit, which we then successfully took public. So I've lived through the tech world, I've lived through the world of having absolutely no money and begging someone to give us office space, and in some sense also accidentally came into this world of gender. I was doing a lot of work as a consultant for the Women's Funding Network. Some of you may know this is a national, global organization, about 150 women's funds around the world. A lot of the same work that was just talked about, and then at the same time I was part of starting Good Capital, which was one of the first social enterprise funds back in 2005, and realized that we were trying to do the same thing, right? With philanthropic funds, we were trying to narrow that income gap, address educational inequalities, deal with healthcare. Same thing as the for-profit piece. But the worlds were really different. Like the philanthropic conferences, only women came to, and I was that obnoxious woman who kept asking about how we could use investment dollars. And on the investment conferences, I was the obnoxious person who kept asking about gender. And there was a big gap between the two. And so that has actually propelled me for about the last 5 years around this question of how does a gender lens or understanding, and let's just be clear, gender is not women, right? So when we talk about gender, we actually are inclusively trying to say, how is it that the socially assigned norms and values, which are different around the world and which are different over time, inform us, enable us to be smarter about how we make investments and invest our time, our money, our volunteerism, et cetera, to make the world a better place. Now, I am personally passionate about how we do this in a for-profit model, but it is a big, wide space. What I'm excited about right now is what we have termed gender capitalism. So I hope some of you saw the SSIR article last fall on this, but this aspect that there is an increasing bridge between the world of finance, where I live, which is supposedly a meritocracy, right? The invisible hand makes all things equal, so we wouldn't even have to understand gender. But that world is starting to understand that implicit bias exists, that we have, that gender can, across the entire value chain, make things smarter, and we can talk about what that looks like. And then the world of women's funds and women's philanthropy, which is starting to realize that finance is not a dirty idea, right? That investment opportunities can really make a difference. And so we're creating this bridge, which we call gender capitalism. At the bank, one of the things that I'm really excited about, just to put a punctuation on this, is last year, our top performing equity fund, so this is a fund that invests with a benchmark of the S&P 1500, was the Women and Girls Equality Strategy, right? The Women and Girls Equality Strategy outperformed World Thematic Alpha, outperformed, you know, all these, so 350 basis points over the S&P 1500. Looking at companies that are proactively asking questions about how women and girls leadership, women's consumer power, the question of where are you doing business and how are you integrating things. So that's the world that that I live in. That, you know, I do also at the bank get to, we work with Cherie Blair and Vital Voices. The other piece that I would bring into this is an aspect of womenomics and women's growing consumer and investing power, right? So if we have the numbers that in general come out of Harvard in terms of women's control of wealth in the US, and women as investors, we know that women are 50% more likely to say that the social, environmental, or political impact of their dollars in terms of investments matters. 50% more likely than men. And so to me, that's part of what's driving this revolution that says my investments are similar to anything else that I would buy. It matters, the values, the impact, et cetera.
I think that that's an excellent segue. Thank you so much for introducing all of yourselves. It's an excellent segue to talking about the work that you're all doing and how there are opportunities to make significant impact, not just for women, but in doing so for society at large. So I'd love for each of you to spend some brief time talking about where you, in your experience, have seen the best opportunities to make that impact.
So our work is all about livelihoods, but specifically creating livelihoods for the most neglected parts of the population, which, you know, in a place like Pakistan where I work is women. You know, women not having the opportunity to choose anything in their lives, really, you know, who they're going to marry, whether they're going to work, whether they're going to send their children to school, you know, whether they're going to use contraception, all those choices that are very personal choices, but that they don't have the agency to make for themselves. When I first started doing this work, the story that inspired me to do this was the story of a young girl whose life sort of really captures, you know, the kind of lives that women in Pakistan lead, and that, you know, the change that can be created in the lives of women like that. And that's, you know, that's reflective not just of women in Pakistan, but really reflective of women in the developing world in general. And so my work is really about creating change for women in the developing world, which I believe is, you know, a really effective tool to creating change within a household and sort of creating, you know, changing that intergenerational transfer of poverty and sort of disrupting that cycle of poverty and illiteracy where a family is poor because it's illiterate, but they're literate because they're poor. So how do you step in and change that or break that cycle? And the story that inspired me to start this was a story that I heard in grad school of a young girl whose name was Azada Khan. She grew up in the 1990s in Afghanistan, in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan at a time when girls were not allowed to go to school by law. And she was so desperate to get an education that she disguised herself as a boy for 12 years of her life to get an elementary and middle school education. She cut her hair, changed the way she walked and talked, and everything about her to take on this new identity. And she changed her name to Azad, which means free, which is ironic because with this identity she actually did experience the kind of freedom that you know, boys in her community experience, walking around without her head covered, you know, playing with boys outside, being able to walk around. And I was, you know, I was in the audience listening to this woman, Aarti, was telling her story, and I was getting my second degree at MIT at the time, and I grew up in Pakistan, and there was a moment of pause where I said, you know, it's not that I didn't grow up close to, you know, sort of looking at poverty. In a place like Pakistan, you can't escape it, but at the same time, you kind of just whiz through it, and you kind of become insensitive to it, and it's invisible to you because it's so much around you that you just don't see it almost. And, you know, I thought to myself, well, I'm getting my second degree at one of the best schools in the world, and it's just a birth lottery, like, you know, we heard earlier. It's just really, that's all it is. And so I went back to that community and started working, you know, in Pakistan in a similar community. And Aarti's NGO had helped Azad in Afghanistan, but was also helping women and girls in Pakistan, and that sort of became the pilot for the work that eventually became Pavanje. It is a for-profit model, which I think is more sustainable for the kind of impact that we want to create. But at the same time, you know, we're working with women that are underprivileged. The average household income is less than 10,000 rupees, which is, you know, less than $100 a month. So it is very impoverished. And, you know, these are women that are uneducated, unskilled, and really, like, you know, don't have a way to break out of that cycle that I was talking about earlier, poverty and illiteracy. So with this work, the idea is to enable them to learn a skill that is marketable in a way that is not just, you know, creating products through Pavanje and selling them, but really creating a skill that is sustainable beyond the life cycle of what they're doing for Pavanje, something that is transferable to other organizations, to other settings, in other ways, whether they move cities, whether they switch jobs, you know, they're able to use something that is marketable. And for them to have a sustainable livelihood through that work. And like we said earlier, what we see happening with this income is really one of three things. We do lots of surveys to find out, you know, where is this money that these women are taking home going, and what is the impact of that? And across the board, the three places where we see this money being used is one in education. So, the children's uniforms, fees, school books. The second is in just household needs, food, buying things, paying back loans sometimes, putting food on the table. And the third is in healthcare. So there's most households have someone who's chronically ill because of malnutrition or something that they grew up with and that needs constant healthcare. So what we see happening in those households through the work is really that these women now are able to start contributing and supplementing the income of their households by 40 to 50 to 60 to 70%, which is significant for a woman to bring home. And what that does is it enables the next generation to either get an education or to improve the standard of living of the family as a whole, so they're able to change their lives. My vision and dream really is to take this model and to put it in, many other parts of the world where there aren't enough livelihoods or opportunities for, either the training of these skills or the use of these skills in creating livelihoods that are sustainable. Right now we're limited to working with 150 women in Pakistan on a very particular skill. We teach them hand embroidery, and we put that hand embroidery on leather handbags and sell them, clutches, bags, etc. But really the idea is that this is a tool for creating a livelihood which can be applied to other skills, to other countries, to other products, to other markets, and that's really what the vision is. So in terms of women and change, I think that we heard this earlier, so I'm not going to repeat it, but we really do see that, like firsthand in the communities that we work with, is that when you put money in the hands of women, the change that you see is very clear and very direct and very visible. So that's sort of the impact of the work that I do.
I'll speak to the two groups of fellows that we work with, our MBA students and then these women coming back from the workforce. There's slightly different gender issues in both. For MBAs, it's interesting, right? I mean, that's obviously a co-ed class. It tends to be, there's some really interesting gender dynamics in the application process, but we won't go into all of that now. See me offline if you're interested for the gory details. But it's a mixed gender class. Obviously, we have almost half and half men and women. And so there are things about being an MBA in social enterprise that are very real for everybody, right? Like student loans don't have too much of a gender lens. They're just huge. But there are other things that are a little different, right? I mean, it's a little bit different in the States, maybe from Pakistan still, but there's still a different sense of, being a high-performing Ivy League MBA at 27 or 28, being a man versus a woman, your earning needs and expectations may well be a little bit different, right? I mean, a lot of our MBAs are engaged, and if that's a man who's engaged, that's a little bit different than a woman who's engaged. It just still is, right? And so I think your point is well taken, that there is a little bit of an opportunity as a woman, you depending on who your partner is and what you want and need, you may have a little bit more choice to take a bit of a hit on salary, right? Or on full-time, part-time work in a way that men still may not, even in the States, right? So I think that's a really interesting way that gender is very much an issue for men and women and opportunity challenge in different ways. And the other part about being an MBA in social enterprise is that there are still, things are changing, right? But there are plenty of nonprofit people or organizations that will look askance at you if you say you're an MBA, maybe especially if you're a Harvard MBA. And I think that women tend to be received, though, a bit easier, right? If you're a male MBA from Harvard and McKinsey and wherever else you might have come from, I think that cultural leap into some social change context is going to be even harder. So I think that's a little bit of an interesting opportunity for women. The cohort of women re-entering the workforce is women. That's a single gender cohort. And there I think we see kind of three interesting opportunities. There are tons of challenges, but that gets highlighted so often, so let's talk about some opportunities. One is, if you've seen some of the work specifically around impact investing, there's this talk of a need for multilingual leadership, right? It's really exciting, but really hard, brave new world where you're trying to run and create a successful business model and make a profit, which we know is really tough, but also trying to change the world and change human lives, which proves also to be really hard. And so you need this confluence of skills that is about understanding what a poor woman in Pakistan or in Dorchester or wherever else is going through to raise her family, And you also have to be able to see, interpret your cash flow and look at a 5-year financial model, right, which are not things that necessarily go together. And I think that women generally tend to be more systems thinkers and a little bit more holistic in their thinking and approach. And so I think that approach and skill set is very well suited to a lot of social enterprise challenges. Similarly, the fields that are touched here are diverse, and so the people are diverse, right? You're working with Bank of America and the people financing your microfinance funds and loans, but you're also working with community workers who are filling out those loans and meeting the families and judging ability to repay. And again, stereotypically, but women as generally the more relationship, other focused gender, I think are in a better position to have those diverse relationships successfully and bridge, be able to put on a suit and feel comfortable in a boardroom, going over your results to your Bank of America lender, but also then dressing appropriately, going to Dorchester and going door to door and meeting your lenders, right? That tends to be, I think women tend to be a little more flexible and comfortable in multiple worlds. For better or worse, the social enterprise sector still tends to be more flexible work. A lot of that is a bummer because it is because of the fact that there aren't enough resources to pay salaries and keep people at desks for 12 hours a day. It's good that we're not at desks, but it's too bad we don't have the resources to pay the salaries. And so I think that, again, women are more creative about flexible work situations, right? And kind of putting together non-typical resources to make things work. So yeah, maybe you don't get paid as much, but maybe that means you don't need childcare, or you can have a second job that's really lucrative per hour that balances out your budget, right? I think women are just a little bit more resourceful to try to make hard situations work, which social enterprise work tends to be hard. And then finally, just the purpose piece. I think that, women are much more likely from wherever they're sitting, whether it be CMO of a consumer goods company or executive director of a nonprofit, to have that kind of, again, other orientation, kind of constant filter, right? For the same reason that they invest more in their families and tend to use more of their disposable income on education or health, I think just tend to have that lens of, okay, is this consumer product, new launch going to, whatever the example is, right? Is there horrible toxins in the shampoo that we're selling, and is that kind of a bummer, even if it's a little bit cheaper or immediately more shiny or something? So I think that just that constant filter of purpose and responsibility and meaning, again, stereotypically not always, but it is a little bit more of a female trait, and that's the bottom line of social enterprise.
Great. So we are going to start the Q&A in about 5 minutes, but first I want to hear from Maria and Jackie about the areas or area where you think there's the most opportunity to make change for women that will ripple through society in general.
Great. I will keep my remarks very, very short on this. So I love everything that has already been said, but I'm going to address this question from the aspect of systems change. For this group especially, I can imagine there are a lot of aspirations about not just particular interventions, but how can we disrupt the entire system. So here's my plea for entrepreneurship. As I think about a New Yorker who now lives in Washington, D.C., and I don't know how many of you spend time in Washington, D.C., it has, I'll try to say this in the least judgmental way possible, it can have the feeling of a bit of a one-horse town in that the world of politics takes up a lot of oxygen. A lot of people spend a lot of time about thinking about systems change as policy advocacy, which has a huge impact. And I don't want to diminish the importance of that, but policy is hard to change. Systems that affect the poor in America are notoriously difficult to change, particularly in this political environment. So here's my plea for entrepreneurship. One of the things that I love about Lyft as a new entrant into Lyft's universe is the idea that there are social entrepreneurs like Lyft, like my boss, Kirsten Rudel, who are thinking about, gosh, how can we create a demonstration model that says, even absent a total disruption of the social services system, you can create a solution that is practical. So as I think about so many of the audiences I speak to, because sort of like Jackie, I traverse the worlds of business and social change a lot, there are people in the room who come at this work because they believe it's the right thing to do, a number of people think that it's the smart thing to do, and then there are a huge majority of people who are in the room because their boss told them to be. And they really could care less either way, but they have a certain mandate, a certain thing that they're trying to achieve at work, and that's totally legit. And I think from the perspective of just trying to get the results that you want in the universe, whether it's a social change result or a bottom line result, you have to think about who's in the audience. And so as we think about the work that our organization is trying to do with other organizations like ours, is to say, absent total systems change, can we create a model that is practical, that has a strong positive ROI, that gets the results that people want? I'll just give you one little factoid from us on this. On average, it takes us about $350 to work with each individual family that we serve. And it's a rough metric. We haven't monetized everything. We'll be estimating roughly about $6,000 worth of benefits in terms of earned income tax credit, the benefit of affordable child care, healthcare enrollment, the additional income due to employment that we so often help people with. You think to yourself, gosh, what can $6,000 do? A lot. For the typical family of four living in poverty in America, making about $24,000 a year, an additional $3,000 in income can improve to boost their children's income by at least 15% over 15 years. It's these little tiny pieces that can have huge impacts. And I love what Salva had said earlier about breaking the cycle of poverty. For us, that's what we care most about. Poverty is so huge and intractable. We can say, how can we break that link? So poverty is not a legacy you pass to your children. But if you're born poor, it's not necessarily true that you stay poor, and not necessarily true that your kids stay poor. Can we break that link and create opportunities for future generations? I know I felt that in my own life, and I'm thankful for it every day. And as the middle class shrinks, as income inequality gets greater, it is heartbreaking to me that people feel increasingly like that American dream is out of reach for people who live here, and it doesn't need to be that way. And social enterprise has a unique role to play in saying, gosh, screw the current system, we can show that we can come up with solutions that work.
So wow, we could talk about so many things. I will make one comment and then get to your three things for where I see opportunity. And the comment is going to be around women in power. And I guess I'd love to have a conversation about this question of are women going to decide to step back from being breadwinners and just say a man is not a financial plan, so be careful. And women are built to last. We have income needs that extend longer. We have disruptive careers. 40% of us are the breadwinners in families now. So see me afterwards, but there's a whole bunch of conversations that I'd love to pick up around that. Three areas where I see a gender lens really driving for opportunity. One is around entrepreneurship. And this question, the research was done here, right, where we understand implicit bias, and if you gave investors the exact same perspectives in a female voice and a male voice, 60% more investors will invest in the male voice, right? The opportunity around how do you create systems to put funding, whether it is in micro enterprise or high growth enterprise or customer focused enterprise, that gets around that implicit bias, that's an opportunity, right? And look at what Village Capital's doing, look at what there's just a lot of people doing interesting things in entrepreneurship. Second area is in this, what we call workplace equality, but really this is what we do at the bank, investing in companies that are thinking from their board all the way through their supply chain. How is it that we're leveraging the talents of everyone? And you can look at the fact that companies with 3 or more women outperform those without by 53% return on equity. You can look at the fact that women run hedge funds have 50% higher returns than those of their male counterparts. You can look at questions of pay equality, all of those things. So wherever you end up, get curious and ask those questions. How is it? Just the question asking is so important. The third area is products and services. And so whether you are talking about products that address childbirth in low resource situations, or you are talking about cars, ask the question about, are we thinking holistically about how people across the gender spectrum are going to use our product? Because you understand childbirth, But when do you think car companies started putting women crash test dummies in the driver's seat? 2010. Okay? So women were driving cars a lot longer before that, but we were testing women crash test dummies in the passenger seat. You start asking questions about pharmaceutical companies and how are they testing on men and women, and is it equal? All of those questions in terms of products and services and getting outside of our biases, that pattern recognition that is there about who uses and how they use and who earns and how they earn and who needs what, those are huge opportunities.
Fantastic, thank you all so much. And I think we'll turn it over to questions now. And I can see them, and I guess they've been upvoted. And the number one voted question here is social stereotypes and cultural superstitions are often barriers to leading change for gender-related issues. What are some ideas and solutions to drive this change more efficiently and effectively? So one of the four of you feel especially moved to, or feel like that you have an answer to that particular question? Perhaps you've encountered it in your work, or
Well, I mean, there's so many pieces to this, we're probably gonna all take something. If you wanna say, gender-related issues, I put you to, Jackie Zader did a great TED Talk, and she talked about women have issues, right? Like, we've got this issue and that issue and the other issue, and I do think that, the stereotypes around women in the workforce, we've kind of said, oh, women need to lean in, except that when women lean in, either they get pushed back or, come on, some of us are going to fall over. Right? Like, it just, and so there are, I think the biggest trend that I see is not having this be a women's issue, right? And saying this is an issue for all of us, and having male leadership and male voices engaged in real conversations, and you're starting to see that, whether it's the UN he for she campaign or broader issues of the corporations that are having the most progress around gender inclusion, have male leaders involved in it.
great. Yeah, I think that in terms of superstitions and stereotypes, it's sort of mythology that runs through in different ways through many different cultures. And I know that each of you is working on solving this question. I think we discussed a lot of the solutions. And then I like this other question of what specific advice do you have for young women? That's something that I definitely wanted to drive at during this session, and would love to probably end on this note, something actionable that you could recommend to the people who came today, that they can think about and keep front of mind as they pursue their careers.
I'm sorry. So, I mean, I think the one thing that I'll say in response to this, which was also going to be sort of, if I was asked the takeaway that I would want the audience to take away, would be that I feel that a lot of times women are limiting themselves also in terms of how we think, what we think we're capable of. I feel like this is true in general, not just for women, but it seems to be more true for women, and I know that it was true for myself as well when I was starting out, was just thinking, limiting yourself to what you think is either expected or possible or imaginable. And I think that doesn't need to be true. I think that, what you're able to accomplish or achieve is as wide as, you let your thinking go. And, when I moved back to Pakistan to do this, my family was very opposed to this. My dad, as a South Asian, male, felt that with 2 degrees from MIT, he wanted to, see me working at Apple or Google, and, which I did, but he wanted me to stay there. He just didn't understand, what I was trying to do. When I came back to the US and applied for a visa for a summer program that I was doing, I felt like the visa officer was going to reject me because she couldn't comprehend that I had just come back to do this work, and I told her, but I'm here to take care of my parents, and my parents are not even 60, so she was like, what are you doing? Like, why are you in Pakistan? Why do you want to go back? But just, the idea that, my family was opposed to it. I do work in a male-dominated field for the products that we make. But honestly, when people ask me this, all I say is that I just ignore the noise and I just do what I do, and I get to the point where the noise goes away. where people stop pointing fingers, where people stop saying, well, you can't do this, or you're a woman, et cetera, et cetera. And, the idea of leading in came up, and I know that for me, like reading a book like Lean In was just validation that, someone like Cheryl Sandberg also struggles with the same things that we as women do. And I think everyone on the panel would agree that we do that as well. Like in our heads, I raise investments for my company from all, middle-aged males, and my entire board is made up of males. And, I did walk into my first meeting trying to gather this investment with a little voice in my head saying, well, I'm a 20-something-year-old woman. What are these men thinking about me right now? You just can't escape those kind of thoughts coming into your head. But then you just stop and you just do what you're going to do. And then you realize that everyone may not be as biased as you may think they are, or everyone may not be thinking about the fact that you're a woman. Sometimes they are. I mean, I've definitely experienced, places and things where that is true. But I think that the other thought I have on this is that creating community between women really helps. What we're doing today in the room right now is great because, I see with the women that I'm working with, they come from the kind of background that is unfathomable to most of us. And then we have here customers, women customers that are also part of our supply chain that are, women that are Pulitzer Prize winning journalists, for example. And one of them is a brand ambassador for us, and she went back to Pakistan to meet with these women. And it was eye-opening for me to see that connection happening because the women in the village, for them, that woman who had come from the U.S., from this glamorous world, was an anomaly. And, these women had taken out their cell phones, they were taking pictures of Lorraine, and Lorraine had her SLR, and she was taking pictures of these women who were so fascinating for her. So that connection, I think, gave confidence to both those sets of women in a way. The women in Pakistan sitting there thinking, well, we have the opportunity and the confidence to make these products that are carried by these women in New York. And for them to come together and to think about, how different their lives are and what validation they can get from each other. Because in a way, they are from very different worlds, but they're still struggling in a male-dominated world. For Lorraine to win the Pulitzer Prize for journalism was something that was, in the 90s, a really, really big deal for her. And for these women to be able to be the first women in their household to be able to work is as much of a stretch for them. So in some ways, I think there's a lot of value for this question to bring women together as a community and to see, problems that we're facing and how we can discuss them together.
Other actionable advice for the audience today?
I think, this question about, being in a field dominated by men is a little different if you're in a big firm in a sector dominated by men versus as an entrepreneur, but in both cases, I think the community factor is important, specifically around peers, right? Look for kind of peers/role models in a similar position, maybe a few years ahead, just to reality check, because, I think it's not that there's sort of an evilness or that, older men are looking to hold women down intentionally in most cases. It is implicit bias, right? I mean, the research that Jackie cited, as well as, what was done here recently, but for years and decades, it's implicit human bias. Women do it to other women. Like, it's not a